You walk into the garden center early in the spring, and the first thing that hits you is the smell of synthetic fertilizer and the bright, glossy rows of plastic bags. Every single one of them promises a miracle. You see specialty tomato food, bloom boosters, and micro-blended soils, some running $30, $40, or $50 a bag. We buy them because we want those deep red, heavy heirloom tomatoes that taste like summer. But by August, many gardeners are standing by their vines, looking at yellowed blossoms falling to the dirt, or fruits with hard green shoulders, radial cracks, and dry, puckered bottoms. We blame the weather. We blame the seed company, or the bugs, or our own lack of a green thumbstop, and think about that for a moment. There is a plain, stiff cardboard box sitting in the laundry aisle of every grocery store in America. It costs about $4. Inside is a clean white powder, soft as talc, that has been sitting there quietly since before your grandmother was born. That box contains the exact answer to a legendary harvest. An old man named Earl Whitaker proved it for 41 straight growing seasons on a quiet quarter-acre lot down in Bakersfield, California. Earl passed away in 2019 at 91 years old. For 4 decades, his neighbors would drive out of their way in August just to slow down and stare at his south fence. Brandywines, Cherokees, and mortgage lifters hung there like heavy crimson ornaments, 6 and 7 feet off the ground, clean and unbroken. Every single one of those giant tomatoes traced back to 2 flat spoons of that white laundry powder, dissolved in a gallon of ordinary well water, poured around the base of the vine exactly twice a season. My name is Eli, and I am not making any of this up. I spent 2 long summers down in the cool, dark basement of the Agricultural Library at the University of California, Davis. I sat there turning the yellowed pages of every regional extension bulletin published between 1925 and 1985. As I read, I watched something strange happen. Decade by decade, the word borax slowly began to disappear from the official recommendations. Right there on the page, the print shifted, the text grew thinner, until, by the late 1970s, the mention of it was just gone. The knowledge wasn't disproven. It was simply buried under a mountain of newer, more expensive packaging. Understand this, a tomato plant is not deep down, hungry for nitrogen the way a stalk of field corn is. If you pour heavy nitrogen onto a tomato, you will grow a beautiful, lush, dark green bush with thick stems and magnificent leaves, and almost no fruit. It is one of the most heartbreaking sights in a backyard garden. The plant looks flawless, but it won't produce. That is because a tomato is hungry for something else. It is hungry for boron. Boron is what we call a micronutrient. A plant needs only a tiny microscopic trace of it compared to the big 3 elements of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. But tiny does not mean optional. A man can sicken and die for the want of a trace vitamin he needs only a pinch of, and a tomato vine will fail completely without a whisper of boron. To understand why this works, we have to look back 10,000 years to where the tomato actually belongs. The wild ancestors of our modern tomatoes didn't come from the plains or the woods of North America. They evolved on the dry volcanic western slopes of the Andes Mountains in Peru and Ecuador. Those soils are weathered down from ancient rock that is naturally rich in boron, containing 2 to 4 times the amount you will find in an ordinary backyard garden bed today. The entire flowering and fruiting biology of the tomato was tuned by nature to expect an abundance of this single mineral. When we brought the tomato out of the Andes and planted it in our glaciated northern soils, our sandy coastal plots, and our heavily leached red clays, we put it in dirt that was already starved of it. Then, a century of hard cultivation mined whatever remaining traces were left, carrying it off to the kitchen in the harvest year after year. Inside the living tissue of the vine, boron performs 3 precise biological jobs. First, it cross-links the pectin in the cell walls. Pectin is the natural glue that holds plant cells together, and boron acts like a thread that stitches that glue into a strong, flexible mesh. That mesh is what allows a heavy tomato to swell to the size of your fist without splitting open or cracking across the shoulders when a heavy rain hits. Second, it drives the extension of the pollen tube. When a grain of pollen lands on a tomato blossom, it must grow a microscopic tube down into the ovary to fertilize the flower. Without boron, that tube stalls out and dies halfway through the journey. The flower turns yellow, dries up, and drops off the vine. That is your dropped blossom. Third, boron acts as the vehicle that moves sugar from the green leaves down into the developing fruit. When boron runs short, the sugar transport network shuts down. The tomato might grow, but it will taste like wet grocery store cardboard. When boron is present in the right amount, the sugars pour into the fruit, giving you that rich, old-fashioned sweetness. But I must stop here and give you an honest limit, a very strict warning about this method. Boron is a precise biological knife edge. With standard nitrogen fertilizer, if you accidentally pour twice what the plant needs, the vine usually survives. With boron, you cannot do that. The window between a miraculous harvest and a poisoned, barren soil is incredibly narrow. If you ignore the measurement, if you eyeball it heavy, or if you tell yourself that if 2 spoons are good, then 4 spoons must be better, you will burn the edges of your leaves crisp brown, twist the new growth into stunted knots, and ruin your crop. This is not a method for careless guessing. It requires respect, exact measurement, and strict timing. The big chemical companies understood this narrow window, but they also understood something else. In 1960, the 4 largest producers controlled less than 40% of the fertilizer market. By the late 70s, they controlled over 60%. There is immense profit in selling a beautifully branded $40 bag of specialty plant food that a gardener has to buy fresh every single spring. There is absolutely no profit in telling a homeowner to walk past the garden center entirely, go down the grocery aisle and buy a $4 box of plain, unpatentable laundry powder that will last them 10 seasons. So, the old bulletins stopped being reprinted. The advice faded out of the conversation, and a whole generation grew up believing that big fruit required big spending. The old knowledge is still there, waiting in the dirt. I want to show you the exact way to use it safely, the physical steps of the preparation, the water temperature needed to unlock the powder, and the 2 specific calendar dates when the vine is hungry enough to receive it without harm. Let us step out of the library and onto the dirt, right where the math becomes reality. To bring Earl Whitaker's 41 years of success into your own garden, you must treat this white powder not like a casual handful of lime, but like a precise prescription. You will need 3 things: a standard box of plain, unblended borax from the laundry aisle, a clean 1-gallon jug, and a level measuring teaspoon. Stop and look closely at the box before you buy it. The label must read sodium tetraborate decahydrate, or plain borax, and absolutely nothing else. In the modern mulch and grocery aisle, there are boxes right next to it that contain added fragrances, optical brighteners, or synthetic water softeners. If you pour those into your soil, the surfactants will coat the roots, lock out water, and ruin the biological life of your bed. The plain, old-fashioned box is what we want. The powder inside should be chalk white, dry, and slightly granular, with no scent whatsoever. Here is the exact way you build the stock solution. Fill your 1-gallon jug with warm water. This is the first detail that trips up the impatient gardener. Borax does not dissolve well in cold well water or chilly tap water. The crystals will simply sink to the bottom like sand, and when you pour the liquid, the top will be weak and the bottom will be a concentrated sludge that will kill the roots. The water should be comfortable bath temperature, right around 100 degrees. Porridge out exactly 2 level teaspoons of the borax powder. Do not heap the spoon. Do not leave a rounded mound on top. Take a straight butter knife and scrape it flat across the rim of the spoon, exactly the way an old baker measures flour for a delicate cake. Dump those 2 flat spoons into the warm water, cap the jug tight, and shake it vigorously for a full 45 seconds. You will hear the grit rattling against the plastic. Let the jug sit undisturbed for 10 minutes on the porch so the warmth can finish breaking down the chemical bonds. Then give it one final shake. Look through the plastic. The water should be completely clear, with no white crystals glittering at the bottom. You now hold a master batch of boron stock solution. This liquid is stable. It will not spoil, separate, or lose its potency. So if you have only a few plants, you can cap it tight. Mark it clearly with a black marker so no one ever mistakes it for drinking water. And store it safely on a high shelf away from children and animals. Now understand the scale of what you have just mixed. That single gallon of water contains enough boron to treat 20 to 30 mature tomato plants. You do not pour the whole gallon on one plant. You do not even pour a quart. The proper dose is between 1.5 to 2 cups of liquid per vine, poured slow and steady in a wide circle around the base of the plant. When you walk out to the vine with your measuring cup, do not dump the liquid right against the main green stem. The bark of a tomato vine at the soil line is tender, and a direct wash of concentrated mineral can cause a localized chemical burn. Instead, stay 3 or 4 inches back from the stem. Pour the liquid in a deliberate circle where the outer leaves drip their water. This is where the fine, hairy feeder roots are spread out in the top 4 inches of dirt, waiting to draw moisture upward. The timing of this application is where the magic either happens or fails entirely. The first 1.5 cups must go onto the soil the exact week the plant begins to show its very first yellow blossoms. In most climates, this happens roughly 4 to 6 weeks after the small green transplants first touch the garden soil. Walk your rows in the morning. If you see the lower clusters opening those tiny star-shaped yellow flowers, the plant's biological demand for boron is about to spike by 300%. By placing the mineral in the root zone right now, you ensure that as the pollen grain lands on the bloom, the microscopic pollen tube has the exact building blocks it needs to grow straight down into the ovary. The blossom will set, the green fruit will lock onto the vine, and you will not see those heartbreaking yellow stems and dropped flowers rotting in the mulch. The second and final application happens exactly when those first set fruits have swollen to the size of a standard golf ball. This is usually 4 weeks after the first dose. At this stage, the vine is carrying an immense structural load. It is trying to build thick cell walls for the early fruit while simultaneously pushing out new blossoms higher up the stake. The second cup of solution reinforces the pectin chains, ensuring the expanding skin remains elastic enough to stretch without radial cracking, while providing the transport fuel to pump pure sugars from the leaves straight into the heart of the ripening fruit. Never apply this solution in the blazing heat of a July afternoon. If the sun is beating down on the soil, the water will evaporate instantly, leaving a highly concentrated crust of boron right at the surface, which will sear the shallow roots. Always apply it in the cool stillness of the early morning, between 6 and 9 o'clock, or late in the evening after the sun has slipped below the fence line. Water the bed lightly with clean water before and after the application to ensure the solution glides smoothly through the soil pores rather than sitting on a dry, hardened crust. If you follow this two-step protocol, your total mineral cost per plant is less than 1/100th of a penny. You will watch the green shoulders of your heirlooms ripen evenly to the stem. The flesh will grow dense and heavy, without those hollow, corky pockets inside, and the flavor will carry that sharp, deep, unforgettable acidity and sweetness that money simply cannot buy at the grocery store. It is the exact rhythm Earl used on his Bakersfield dirt, year after year, proving that the most powerful solutions in this life are rarely the ones that come inside a $40 bag. Now, look down at your own shoes and consider the dirt beneath them, because we need to talk about why this simple laundry powder works on some soils within days, while other soils require a bit more understanding. It is an honest fact that no two gardens are identical. If your backyard is carved out of sandy coastal soil, or if you are growing in western alkaline dirt with a high pH, your plants are likely facing a permanent silent boron starvation. Rainwater and heavy hose watering wash boron through sandy seal like water passing through a sieve, because there are no fine clay particles or rich organic matters to hold on to the mineral. On the other hand, if your garden is built on the heavy red clays of the south, the boron might actually be there in the ground, but it is locked up. When we add heavy amounts of lime to our soil to sweeten it and raise the pH, that calcium binds tightly to the native boron, turning it into an insoluble form that a tomato root can stare at all summer but never actually drink. That is why the 2-spoon stock solution is so beautiful. By dissolving the borax completely in warm water and pouring it right into the root zone, you bypass those soil traps. You deliver the mineral in a highly available liquid form that the shallow feeder roots can sip immediately before the chemistry of the soil has a chance to lock it away. But let us stop and look at the other side of the fence, because you must understand exactly how to spot the signs if your soil has already crossed the line into a dangerous boron deficiency. It is a textbook progression that most gardeners misdiagnose every single year. First, look at the very tip of the vine, what we call the terminal bud. Boron is an immobile nutrient inside the plant. Unlike nitrogen, which a plant can move from old leaves up to new ones, boron stays exactly where it was first used. If the roots run out of it, the newest growth at the top of the plant is the very first to suffer. The top leaves will start to curl inward, looking brittle, thick, and bunchy, almost as if the vine had been drifted by a neighbor's weed killer. The stems right below these tips will grow brittle enough to snap like dry twigs if you touch them while pruning. Down below, on the fruit itself, the signs are even more clear. If you cut open a ripe tomato and find that the walls are thin, the inside is dry and hollow, with large empty pockets, and the central core is brown and corky, your plant was starving for boron while that fruit was forming. If your tomatoes look puckered and scarred across the bottom, a condition old-timers call cat-facing, or if they develop deep, ugly cracks that radiate outward from the green stem, like the spokes of a wagon wheel, the cell walls simply didn't have the flexible pectin mesh that only boron can provide. Understand this clearly, you cannot fix a ruined fruit once these scars appear. If you walk out in August and see your crop splitting and rotting on the vine, dumping a gallon of borax water out there won't turn those cracked tomatoes smooth. The biology doesn't work backward. The mineral must be there before the cell walls expand and before the blossoms set. That is why we stick to the strict schedule of the first flower and the golf ball fruit. We are building the foundations of the house before the heavy rains come. Let me tell you about another master gardener named Frank, who kept 5 raised beds behind his house in southern Ohio. Frank was a meticulous man. He saved every eggshell, brewed compost tea every spring, and double-dug his beds until the soil was as soft as black velvet. Yet every August, his big beefsteak varieties would drop half their blossoms, and the few tomatoes he harvested were scarred with those hard yellow shoulders that never went red. He spent $100 a season on premium kelp meals and fish emulsions, believing his soil just needed more premium food. I handed him an old 1940 extension leaflet and a $4 box of laundry borax. He shook his head, laughed, and told me I was going to poison his worms. But he agreed to try it on just one bed, his fifth bed, right against the garage. He mixed the 2 level spoons in a warm gallon of water, used a basic measuring cup to pour 2 cups around each plant in mid-June, and repeated it in July. By late August, Frank called me out to his yard without saying a word over the phone. When I walked around the corner, he was standing by that fifth bed. The vines were so heavy with clean, smooth, unblemished fruit that the cedar stakes were bowing under the weight. There wasn't a single split shoulder or dry, puckered bottom in the entire bed, and when he sliced one open on the garden bench, the flesh was solid, deep crimson, and dripping with sweet juice. The other 4 beds, despite the expensive kelp and the black compost, were still showing the same old split skins and yellow shoulders he had fought for a decade. He looked at the heavy tomato in his hand, looked back at the $4 box sitting on his porch, and said, "I've been buying the whole store." And the answer was sitting next to the wash basin the whole time. That is the power of traditional, targeted knowledge. It makes you independent of the retail supply chain. When you understand the specific trace element your crop is crying for, you no longer have to wander down the fertilizer aisle, overwhelmed by the colorful bags, guessing at what your garden needs. You become a practitioner of precise biology. You treat the cause, not the symptom, and you do it for less than the cost of a single postage stamp. But as we prepare to look at how this exact same mineral interacts with the other crops in your garden, because tomatoes are not the only plants that brought this ancient mountain hunger, we must address the precise way to clean your tools and handle the leftover mixture so your soil stays safe for years to come. Let us talk about the rest of your garden plot, because once you see what this $4 box does for your tomatoes, you will naturally look at your other rows and wonder if they are holding back the same hidden potential. The answer is yes, but you must look closely at the specific hunger of each vegetable, because the rule of the knife edge still applies. Stop and look at your brassicas, your broccoli, your cauliflower, and your cabbage. These plants are absolute gluttons for boron, even more so than the tomato. If you have ever cut open a head of broccoli only to find the central stem is hollow, black, and bitter inside, or if your cauliflower heads are small, stunted, and covered in ugly, rust-colored brown patches, you are looking at classic boron starvation. For these crops, the application follows a different rhythm. You use the exact same 2-spoon master stock solution, but you apply it much earlier. You pour your 2 cups around the base of the plants just 3 weeks after they are set out in the dirt, right as they are building their frame, long before the head begins to form. That single dose ensures the main stem grows solid, sweet, and crisp, allowing nutrients to flow smoothly to the crown. Your root crops, the carrots, the beets, and the turnips, share this same ancient hunger. A carrot that grows up in a boron-starved bed will often develop a dark, woody core that tastes like bitter dirt, and the root will frequently split wide open down the middle long before it reaches full size. Beets will suffer from an internal rot, showing dry, black spots right in the center of their crimson flesh. A single application of the stock solution, poured along the row when the green tops are about 4 inches high, stops the splitting and keeps the roots sweet and solid. But hear me clearly on the exceptions, because this is where a careless gardener can destroy a row in a single morning. You must never, under any circumstances, pour this solution onto your green beans, your peas, or your sweet corn. These plants have the exact opposite biology of a tomato or a broccoli. They are highly sensitive to boron, and what is a healing medicine to a tomato is a lethal toxin to a bean vine. If you apply borax water to a row of snap beans, the leaves will turn scorched yellow within 48 hours. The plant will drop its pods, and the vine will wither. Keep the jug far away from the legume patch. This brings us to the crucial practice of tool hygiene and garden safety. Because a few drops of this liquid can damage a sensitive crop, you must never use the same watering can for your beans that you just used for your borax solution without a thorough cleaning. When you finish treating your tomatoes, take your jug or your watering can to the hose. Rinse it completely 3 separate times with clean, running water and dump that rinsed water onto a patch of lawn or an established fruit tree. Never into your vegetable beds. If you have leftover stock solution in your gallon jug, cap it tight and store it on the highest shelf in your tool shed or your laundry room. Write the word borax in large, unmistakable letters on the side of the plastic with a permanent marker. In its liquid form, it looks exactly like plain water, and you must treat it with the exact same caution you would give a bottle of bleach or ammonia. If a curious pet or a child were to drink it, it would cause severe sickness. When you handle the dry powder from the box, do not use the kitchen spoons your family eats with. Keep a dedicated set of cheap plastic measuring spoons right inside the box, and wash your hands with warm soap and water as soon as you are done shaking the jug. When you treat this method with that level of practical respect, it becomes a safe, permanent pillar of your homestead. You begin to see the garden not as a place where you throw expensive chemicals hoping for luck, but as a balanced system of biological needs. Think back to Harlan Pruitt, that county agent standing in the dust of Oklahoma in 1934. He didn't have a laboratory, he didn't have a massive corporation backing him, and he didn't have a fancy budget. All he had was an understanding of basic soil science and a desire to help his neighbors keep their families from starving when the earth itself seemed to have given up. He looked at a cheap, unpatentable box of household cleaner and saw a way to unlock the life inside the dirt. He handed that knowledge down because he knew that true self-sufficiency isn't about what you can afford to buy. It is about what you know how to do with the simple things already within your reach. Now, the entire year's protocol is in your hands. You know the exact mix. 2 level spoons, 1 gallon of warm water completely dissolved. You know the exact dose, 2 cups per vine. You know the 2 critical dates, at the very first flower and again when the fruit hits the size of a golf ball. You know which rows to feed and which rows to pass by. The next time you walk down the laundry aisle and see that familiar green and yellow box on the bottom shelf, you will look at it differently. You won't just see a way to scrub your clothes. You will see the smooth skins, the heavy limbs, and the deep, rich flavor of the best tomatoes your backyard has ever grown. Now that the year's protocol is clear, we must address the final piece of the investigation, the long-term management of your soil, and how to prevent a single season of success from turning into a quiet buildup of toxicity over the years. Stop and look at the life cycle of your garden bed. When you pour those 2 cups of liquid solution around the feeder roots, the plant drinks what it needs, but a small trace of boron remains locked within the soil matrix. Because boron is an element, it does not evaporate, it does not rot, and it does not break down over the winter like compost or dried leaves. The only way it leaves your garden plot naturally is by leaching downward into the subsoil through the steady pressure of winter rains and melting snow. This means you must never become complacent. If you use the 2-spoon protocol this spring and watch your harvest double, the temptation next spring will be to do it again without thinking. But understand this, if you live in an arid region with very little winter rainfall, like Earl did down in the dry heat of Bakersfield, that boron stays exactly where you left it. In dry climates, or if you are growing inside the protected shelter of a high tunnel or a greenhouse where the natural rain never touches the dirt, you must skip a year between applications. You use it in year 1, you let the soil rest and produce in year 2, and you return to it in year 3. This simple alternating rhythm keeps the mineral level perfectly balanced within that safe, narrow window without ever allowing it to accumulate to the point of poisoning the bed. If you are growing your tomatoes in raised beds or small patio pots, the rules change slightly because the volume of soil is limited. A 5-gallon plastic bucket or a cedar planter box doesn't have the deep subsoil of a quarter-acre lot. In these confined spaces, the drainage is much faster, meaning the weekly watering from your hose will naturally wash the boron out of the potting mix over the course of the summer. For container gardens, you still use the exact same master stock solution, but you drop the dose down to just 3/4 of a cup per pot, applied only once a season at the very first sight of the yellow blossoms. That single, smaller sip gives the container plant its initial biological boost without risking a dangerous buildup in the tight corners of the pot. Let me share one final piece of forgotten wisdom that Earl Whitaker wrote down in the margin of his old garden lead jar back in 1982. He wrote, "The powder gives the sweetness, but the carbon holds the key." What the old man understood without a modern laboratory is that boron needs organic matter to do its job safely. If you pour this solution onto a sterile, depleted plot of dirt that is nothing but hard sand or raw clay, the mineral has no anchor. It will either wash away in the first storm or sit in a concentrated pocket that burns the roots. But if your soil is rich in humate and dark carbon, built up over the winter with shredded leaves, old straw, and well-rotted barnyard manure, the organic matter acts like a giant biological sponge. It catches the liquid boron, holds it gently in a form that cannot burn the vine, and releases it slowly to the roots over a period of 6 weeks. The borax method is not a substitute for building good, dark soil. It is the final key that unlocks the full potential of the work you have already put into your beds. As we bring this long journey to a close, understand that the box on the laundry shelf is just an object. The real power lives in the choice to look past the expensive, beautifully marketed packaging of the modern retail aisle and trust the plain, practical solutions that kept our grandparents fed during the hardest years this country has ever seen. The knowledge doesn't belong to the corporations, it doesn't belong to the seed catalogs, and it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to anyone who is willing to take a level teaspoon, a gallon of warm well water, and a quiet morning in the garden rows to prove the truth for themselves. Tray it on 2 vines this coming June. Keep your own notebook, just like Doris did outside Asheville. Watch the blossom stay tight to the stem, watch the green shoulders ripen to a smooth, unbroken red, and take that first heavy bite out in the evening air when the fruit is still warm from the sun. Once you taste the difference that a fraction of a penny can make, you will never walk down the commercial fertilizer aisle the same way again. You will know the answer has been waiting for you all along, sitting quietly in a plain cardboard box just down the row from the wash basin.